Good afternoon, everyone, both virtual audience and live audience. I'm Julia Sagasser. I'm the programs director here at Camden Public Library, and today we are here with Camden Conference for another program in the Camden Conference Community Event Series. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jane Nice, who is the Community Events coordinator for Camden Conference, and she'll tell you a little bit about Camden Conference and our speaker tonight, Mike Lynch.
Well, we're excited to have an afternoon program, which is a treat for us on the mid-coast, because we normally have them in the evening, but we see here that we already have a live audience that is willing to come out in the middle of an exciting, beautiful Sunday. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the Zoom audience as well for being here. My name is Jane Nice, and I am a volunteer for the Camden Conference. I'd like to welcome you to our program. And we want to thank the Camden Library for being one of our one of our longest partners, no surprise, with the Camden Conference. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan citizens forum. Thank you all citizens for being here, driven almost exclusively by, probably 100+ volunteers, at least, from our community. So our mission is to foster informed discourse on world issues. And in keeping with that, we offer a series of community events leading up to our annual weekend conference. The free events are intended to provide background on our yearly topic and to talk and touch on areas that are related to the conference of what that may not be covered in our 3-day format in February. So this year's conference, which is our 36th, is Global Trade and Politics, Managing Turbulence. It'll take place February 17th to the 19th. And it's live at the Camden Opera House. It's live streamed to 3 other venues, Rockland, Strand, Hutch in Belfast, and USM in Portland. And there are registered volunteers who can also get access to a live stream version at in your own home. Ticket sales are available to all, and information on those are on our website, camdenconference.org. And there you can find out how to get those tickets, how to become a member or a volunteer, and learn about our speakers for the February conference. Their bios are all online. So I know that we have upcoming community events, but I think at this point, for January and February events, since they are coming fast and furious then, please go to the Camden Conference website. They are all listed by location and by type, so it's worth taking a look, because up and down the coast, for 16 different libraries, we have more events coming. Right now, just take a break after this for a couple of weeks for your holiday and enjoy that. Tonight it is my pleasure, or today, actually, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Lynch. And he will take us through the global impact for gold on our politics, past and present. And he's going to talk about the power of that through time. And it's for those of you that are interested in our gold standard, now you'll find out why. To tell you about Mike, he's had 3 acts that he describes 2, but I see 3. The first is that he was a high-tech product manager in development, and has 5 patents for things he did there. And beyond that, he has been executive at a number of companies in the tech world. The second act was when he should have been retiring or doing something much more gentle, but he decided to go into the Peace Corps with his wife, Lynn. The 2 of them went off to Bulgaria for 3 years. They then went, when Mike became the director for the, I'm going to go where you were. I knew you were in Ghana. I was going to be clever and say something else about where in Ghana, but I lost that word, where he went. anyway, to Ghana, and he was the director there, and there he got the gold trade bug. The third act is after he finished with those stints, and the two came back to the country and decided to officially try to retire, which I think he flunked but beautifully. Mike has been working as an instructor at OLLI in Portland, where he's been teaching several different topics. And as you can imagine, one of them is on gold and gold trade. So please, let's give a warm welcome to Mike as he brings us up on that.
Thank you, Joan. Welcome everyone. This is an experiment. We're actually live in the afternoon on a Sunday instead of at night, as well as hybrid. So we'll see how this all goes. I need to get going right away. So I think share the screen, right? Do that. Hang on.
And then hide.
Yeah. It is, we're not going to, we don't really have the time to actually listen to Goldfinger here.
From Mr. Goldfinger.
That's all you get. That was supposed to be, something that we would do when everybody else was talking. So gold and global politics. Right up front, I need to tell you that I have total transparency here. I teach a 16-hour class on gold. Someone who's part of the Camden Conference and has taken the course came to me and said, hey, Mike, would you please do this presentation? And in my head, I made a fatal error. I said, I have 16 hours. That'll be really easy. No problem at all. It's very, very hard going from 16 hours to basically 1. So I go through this because there are times over the next hour, I'm going to go incredibly fast. I'm going to try and summarize things that I might take 30 to 45 minutes in the class, and I'm going to try and do it in 2 or 3 minutes. The other thing is I had to cherry pick. I had to pick the things that would really be appropriate for this audience, for the Camden Conference type of audience. So that's what we've started. That's what's going to happen. That's what we're going to do. So I'm going to start off talking about what is it we are really going to talk about, and then how are we going to do this. So I'm going to show you a 90-second clip from the World Gold Federation Council, that is, and just listen for a second, and it'll at least show you where we're going to be going.
Gold is a cue. It tells us something is special, sacred, prized, alluring. When an object is gilded or glittered with gold, we know it probably has significance. The presence of gold makes a big difference in our global culture, local customs, and even in our understanding of the world. This is the story of how gold is making meaning.
Imagine all of the things that have come and gone since civilization began. All of the currencies and markers of wealth that have fallen in and out of fashion. And all the while, one thing has remained: gold. The first gold coins originated in China and Lydia around 2,000 years ago. And ever since, whole global monetary systems have been developed on the standard of gold.
American banker J.P. Morgan famously said,
"Money is gold, nothing else."
This symbol of wealth also came to be a symbol of worth. We all know the value that gold possesses, but for thousands of years before gold meant money, it meant something.
All right, so I am not going to be talking about the geology. I'm not going to be talking about mining and the environmental impact. I'm not going to be talking about gold and its cultural impact, gold in religion. I will be talking a little bit about gold in history, but mostly J.P. Morgan's money is gold. So we are going to be focusing on gold's impact from a financial perspective primarily. It's hard to do that but that's kind of where we're going, all right? Now, the way we're going to do this is a little bit different than normal, and that is, these are 3 different books. This is Connections by James Burke. This is Splendid Exchange, which is one of the textbooks that is actually required or asked about for reference for the Camden Conference this year. These things take a look at an event in history and what led up to it. Through Line it's an NPR podcast. I've become addicted to it. Their tagline is, every headline has a history. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start off with a current headline, and I'm going to show it to you in just a 30-second clip here. And then I'm going to lead you from 650 BC all the way back to that same clip. All right, here we go. So you all know who this person is, Kevin McCarthy. This is November 2021. He was giving an 8.5-hour presentation on the floor of Congress, and it was a rebuttal to Biden's Build Back Better. I actually pulled the entire 8.5 hours over. I listened to the first hour and a half. I then edited out everything else. Out of the first hour and a half, I took the first 12 minutes. There was a lot of repetition in this presentation. All right. And I'm going to show you 30 seconds of that 12 minutes, and listen carefully, because when we get to the same clip again at the end, it's going to be expanded. It's a minute and a half. You should have a very, very different insights, understanding, and perspective on this. Okay, here we go.
And yet at this very moment, the Democrats are preparing to go on yet another unnecessary spending binge. Then in a couple weeks, they'll have the audacity to ask Congress to raise the debt limit, to borrow more on the overspending. I look forward to that debate as well. My colleagues on the other side often say that what Washington borrows and spends doesn't matter, that the lessons of history don't apply here.
That the lessons of history do not apply here. Okay? I'm going to explain what he means by that and why it's important to understand it and how it fits in to the other 25 seconds before that. All right? Everybody ready? We're about to go way back. Okay? So this is Turkey, approximately 600 BC. All right? I've got to do this on the mouse here. Phrygia is here. You all know the story of King Midas. All right, that's where he was at. Over here is Lydia. This blue line is something called the Pactolus River. All right, King Midas actually washed his hands in the Pactolus River. It was filled with gold. Okay, supposedly from King Midas. That's not true. It was from the mountains of further above. But the Pactolus River is real, and it did have a lot of gold in it. Now, what's important though is over here, Lydia. You've all heard rich as Croesus. Have you heard that term, rich as Croesus? All right. In Lydia, Croesus was the king of Lydia in about 550 BC. All right. And yes, he was very, very rich. Now, what happened was that in Lydia, along the Pactolus River, there are lumps of stone. It's called electrum. And in that electrum, there's gold and there's silver. The Lydians figured out a way to separate out the gold and the silver. Okay, it's a great thing, good deal, way to go. But then they had this other thought. They said, could we take the gold and could we make it into a coin or something round? And could we mold it? And could we put a stamp on it? So they turned around and they figured out a way to do that. But then they said, well, now what do we do with it? Remember, gold's been used ornamentally in religion and a whole bunch of other ways, but this idea of a coin, currency. So I'm going to ask you all right here to think about if you were the Lydians and you had this gold and you were thinking that you could use it somehow to trade, or maybe it, you know it, you think it has value. What were the challenges you might have to make a currency out of it? And if people can come up with things, I have gold for you here. All right? Any ideas? Bitcoin. Bitcoin, oh, actually, no. Anybody else? Idea? What are the challenges you have to get around?
Establishing value.
Establishing value. That's certainly one of those things. Yes.
What can we buy with it and from whom?
And what can we buy with it and from whom? Absolutely. Okay. One other, go ahead. Genuine, yes. Fraud kind of going in there, yes. Genuine and fraud actually comes into something that's critical. We're going to talk a lot more about it. Trust. You have to make sure everyone trusts that the value, as Jim said, is the same. All right?
I think about longevity, continue.
Can it continue? Absolutely. All right. These are all absolutely great here, for people. If I do this, I'll be off camera, but okay, I'm gonna go off camera. For new people who did this is great. Gold coin, gold coin, gold coin, and you. That's a big chocolate coin. You guys did well.
We trust Kennedy.
Yes. Well, you can unwrap it and eat it at any time. It's chocolate. All right. So all of those things, absolutely true. The Lydians figured out a way to do it. And they created the whole idea of using gold as coins and currency. It was stayed long. It got a value that everyone agreed and understood. This was part of the silk trade. This was a significant step forward. And it's a significant step forward in trade as well as in how gold gets used. Okay, so what were the things that these gold coins were used for? I'm just looking for the top two. What do you think?
Store of value.
Store of value, yes, but what did they actually buy, or were they were just trading with it? Okay. Animals, okay. What would be the second major thing? Think about it globally, not necessarily as an item of food you're buying, but trade is number one. That's what these coins are used for. What do you think the second biggest thing would be? Transportation, good idea. Ornamentation, possibly.
Exchange for labor.
Exchange for labor. Julia over here is closer. It's closer.
Status.
Military. Military. Okay. So what happens is, think about this. It's 300 BC. The Romans haven't quite come in here yet. Alexander is out. He's turning every place, every city he finds into something that's named after himself. He's got columns of soldiers. As they're moving forward and they are at war, you can rape and you can pillage, but you can't take everything. You can't take all the houses. You can't take all the cows. You can't take everything with you. You're in the military. So what they do is they are paying the military in gold coins. All right. So, and that becomes really, really important. It's also something that continues all the way to almost the present time, up through World War I and into World War II. Gold becomes critically important to have enough money to build ships, to fund the armies and what have you. Battle of Waterloo, quite truthfully, gold, believe it or not, Rothschild came in with enough gold to pay the mercenaries so that Wellington could beat Napoleon. And it keeps on going. It's amazing. But you need to understand. So the Roman Empire, they certainly took this concept of using gold coins, paying off the military, but they took it a step further because it wasn't, Rome is conquering, they're almost always at war, but but it's also one of the first societies that says, I think wealth is really important. And by the way, gold is what has that wealth. Gold's a symbol for it, and it's the value for it. Therefore, yes, we can turn around and whoever gets more of it gets more power. It's a little bit different. Generally the power is with the generals or with the kings, but they're saying, somebody on the first triumvirate, Crassus, he wasn't in the military, but he had all the gold, he had the money. And gold's a bedrock. Rome never had enough of it. And that starts another very, very important trend. So for example, Rome, when it took over and conquered Spain, amazingly, there was apparently a lot of gold in the mountains of Spain. And Rome actually turned around and made Spaniards slaves and had them mine the gold. And this would have been in like 200, 300 AD time frame, 200 AD, I think it was. The irony is 1,300 years later, when Cortez and whatever got to the South America, they took the natives, turned them into slaves to mine gold. It keeps going around. It's just this incredible circle. All right, foundations for any currency, coins, or economy. The first one up there is trust. That is absolutely critical. We talked about it a second ago. Everybody has to agree on what that value is. And this gets totally goofed up many, many times throughout history. And I'll explain how this gets goofed up and how you can change and lose that trust. The other thing about gold or any currency is that we talked about it. You mentioned, I think, Jim, you said it's a store of value or a unit of accounting. That means it's also portable power. You can use it in the country you're in the town you're in. You can trade with other countries. You can do a lot of things. You have portable power. You have one of these gold coins, so you have a whole boatload of them. And sometimes that's what you needed. The other thing that's important is a country's economy up until present time, it's limited by the amount of gold or silver it actually has. All right? It's limited by the gold or silver it actually has. And what that means is that countries are competing to get more gold. And by competing to get more gold, that means, are they going to war? Are they colonizing another area? Did they find gold within their own country? But they're trying to do whatever they can to increase the amount of gold. And just to give you an idea of how important this concept is, so the example up here is the Opium Wars. Where I talk about it right here. So what was really going on was that the Brits had become addicted to tea, and they were trading with the Chinese. Now, in this case, it's not necessarily gold, it was silver, but the concept is the same. The problem is they're trading for that tea because they're addicted to it. The Chinese are taking all their silver, but the Chinese don't want to trade. There's no other circle. The silver disappears. All of a sudden, England realizes that they've lost almost 15% of their economic wealth because it's sitting over in China. Those Chinese don't want to trade. They just take our gold or our silver. So what did the Brits come up with? Opium. You got it. They came up with something that was going to be addictive to the Chinese, and it was opium. And all of a sudden, you had this circle, you had the opium going in, it was kind of subterfuge, it wasn't necessarily above boards, but silver was coming back to England. It was coming back in through the Indian company, I think it was. I'm not sure, I may have the wrong company on that one. At any rate, there's that. So now what happens here is that the nation's supply of gold is critically important. So what countries can do to increase their value is basically they devalue the coin. So you take a gold coin, right? You melt it down, and now all of a sudden, instead of only putting 50% copper, we'll say, in it, or nickel or whatever, and then, you know, surrounding it with gold, all of a sudden you put 80% of copper in there. Okay, looks like the same gold coin, but you, the country, has more gold because you can make more coins. However, the coin doesn't weigh the same, and people figure it out. And all of a sudden, remember the first thing that was important, trust, gone. And when that happens, countries are in trouble. So you can do that. The other thing that will also happen, and we're going to talk about this more, is that sometimes people will do what's called clipping the coins. Have you ever heard that term, clipping coins? All right. So when you clip a coin, if you're not necessarily the government and debasing it, you're just someone who's there, you know, on the streets, and you take a little tin snips and you clip the edge. Now, if you all look at your coins that you have right now, your 25-cent pieces or whatever, if you take a look at it, you're going to find out along the edge, there's lines. Those lines are there to stop clipping. Because before, when you took that and clipped the edge, no one would necessarily know. It was just a little bit, but you keep doing it a lot, and all of a sudden, you got a handful of gold.
So nobody cares if you clip a penny.
Well, probably now, no one would care if they clip a penny. Probably not. So at any rate, you know, one of the big modernizations of minting was we're putting those lines along the edge as well as automating. All right, okay. This is it's a really simple slide, but it's an important slide to make sure you get. So we're saying that the economies of every country are limited by the amount of gold they have. So if you take a look at, look, I got to do it this way. If you look at this bank here, it's got a golden roof. That golden roof is solid. You can't go any more than that. So what you want to try and do is figure out ways with the amount of gold that you have, how can I make that magically seem like it's more? All right. That becomes critically important in the 13, 14, 15, 1600s. Actually 15 and 1600s more. All right. Paper currency, based on the amount of gold you have, potentially can lead you and give you your economy, your country, more power. So we're going to talk about how does gold become paper and why. All right. So there's by the way, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, there's a lot of other things happening. We don't have time to go into all those. Gold coins into paper. So think about the problem you might have if you were trading big items, shiploads of things, okay? And you're going across the Mediterranean, wherever, you know, up into England or whatever. You need a lot of gold in your boat, or you need to bring it overland. It's heavy. It can be robbed. You can get robbed. And when you get there, has everybody clipped the coins or not? Is the value the same? So it's got these issues, and what they're trying to do is say, is there another way I can use the value that gold has, but using it with paper? So travels of Marco Polo back in 1291. When he comes back, he's the first one who actually says, hey, the Great Khan took like bark of a tree and made it into something that had value. Bingo. But that's 1295. It takes a couple hundred years for people to actually figure this out. So now what I want you to try and envision, you've all probably been Europe someplace. Think of an older city, town. There's always going to be a great big square in the center. Right now, it's filled with Christmas kiosks or what have you. But the idea would be that normally there's a whole bunch of traders out there. And you've got someone, we'll say, who is selling rice. And he's going to put that rice into a bowl. And that's how he's going to sell it, with the bowl. But over on the other side of the marketplace is someone who's selling the bowls. And he needs like 100 bowls. So he goes over to the guy with the bowls and says, hey, I need 100 bowls, but I don't have the money yet. So he gives them a promissory note. He will give them the money. All right. And it's a piece of paper. And that's how it starts at first. Then we get into IOUs, and eventually we get into bank notes. And I use bank notes as a generic term. What was really happening, particularly in England, is that there wasn't necessarily the bank, it was a goldsmith, because the goldsmiths had a guild, and they're the people that are stamping out the gold coins. So what happens is people go to the goldsmith and they turn around and they say, I'd like to buy 2 pounds of gold, and you're going to turn that into 1,000 coins, make it 100 coins. Okay. And so the goldsmith says, well, sure, I can do that. I'll give you a note that says I can do that. So you take off with your note. The note, everybody knows, is worth 100 gold coins. And you go off and you trade and do things with that. All right. This sounds great. People can go back to the goldsmith. It says right on it who the goldsmith is. Bingo, you're all set. Well, what happens is the goldsmiths start to realize that, okay, I've given out 5 of these things for 500 gold coins, but people are only coming back for like 100 of them or 200 of them. All right. So the goldsmith says, I don't think I have to worry about the fact that I only have enough gold for 500. I think I can make these notes out for as many as 800 because people aren't coming back. You've all heard of fractional reserve banking, right? I just explained the essence of fractional reserve banking, and that's exactly how it happened. Okay, that's how the thing got started. All right, but everybody is trying to grow how much currency, how much gold they actually have. The Ponzi scheme. No, I'll show you somebody who really has a Ponzi scheme later. This is not so bad. There's another one coming up. So the promissory notes, they do have to be backed up. Paper IOUs, it's the goldsmiths that are really doing most of this initially, because you don't have a lot of modernization or mechanization of printing coins yet. That doesn't come in until like the 1600s. Local banks, they can transfer. Fractional reserve banking. Banks, bonds, and paper. The need for it evolves from that demand for more coins. So between like 1650 and 1720, there are huge, huge changes in things relating to gold that have profound impact on economies for the next 300 years. There are 3 guys that I'm going to focus on. Well, I wish there was 3. I can only do 2 because I don't have time. And the other guy is the Ponzi scheme master. I'm sorry. At any rate, this is the first one. He is Nicholas. If Christ had not died for thee, thou hast been damned, bare bones. He went by Nick Bourbon. It was a heck of a lot easier. And he started off as a doctor, and he that wasn't good enough for him. He wasn't making enough money. He turned around and became a real estate developer, or at least building things. And he did that in like 1660. There was an important event that happened in London in 1666 that made this guy rich as anything. Anybody have any idea what happened in 1666 in London? Does it say right there? Yes, it does. I cheated. I put it on there. There's a great big fire. About 25% of London burns to the ground. Everything is made of wood. If you can think, anybody know the history of Portland? July 5th, 1866, almost 200 years later, bang, you've got about 30% of Portland that burns. Similar idea. Nick comes in and says, I can rebuild all this stuff. So he's the developer, and he starts to rebuild everything. But he goes one step further. He actually says, you know, this is a huge drain on the country's economy because more money has to be used to build this stuff. And he says, suppose we had everyone everywhere in the country, or at least in London, let's start there, chip in to a pot so that if their house did burn down, they would turn around and they wouldn't have to put money out, basically insurance. So he creates the Insurance Office of Houses. Bingo. And that helps, by the way, you can see he's taking a little bit of money out. The other thing he starts to do is he says, you know, what else can we do? Everybody's got so much money tied up in their houses. And remember, we're trying to be able to grow money. So he comes up with, I think I'm going to create this bank called the National Land Bank. And he does it in like 1690. And he said, he basically comes up with the idea of mortgages. And when you have a mortgage, all the money isn't necessarily tied up in the house. It allows more currency to go into the economy. And so that's what he's doing. So he comes up with that. He's incredibly wealthy at this point in time, and he's doing really well. So he just goes off and starts writing books. And quite truthfully, some of his books become very important from a macroeconomic standpoint. And this is before Adam Smith and all the rest of it. One of the things he talks about is mercantilism, and he is against mercantilism. So let me explain a couple of things here. Mercantilism is basically the international economic trade system that we've had for hundreds and hundreds of years. All right. The concept says that you don't want to lose any of the gold that's in your country. So if you're trading with somebody, okay, you want to have more things coming in and less money going out. You hear it every month, trade deficit. It's still the same concept. He's turning around saying, we shouldn't be worried about, oh, let me go one step further. The other thing is that he says, everything that's made, we should keep everything manufactured in our own country. Made in Britain, made in America. The idea is you don't want anything to have to leave. You don't want to lose any money, okay? It goes so far as if you have a colony, all right, you don't want them manufacturing anything. You just want the raw materials. So the raw materials will come to Spain, to France, to Britain, to wherever, and that's where the things will be made. So you can sell the finished goods and you will get gold back, and you will increase your economy and you will become more powerful. All right. That's critical to understand. It keeps going basically into globalization, guys. All right. This is the concept that globalization, and when the Camden Conference comes in February, is actually going to be saying, well, we have something different now. And I'm going to talk to you as we keep going about why did this change and how did it change? All right. Everybody got this? I think, okay. All right. The other one, second guy, his name is John Law. He actually was a murderer. He actually went to Amsterdam. He then went to France, and in 12 years became the richest person in France, ran the bank in France, created a Ponzi scheme called the Louisiana Land Company, and the stock rose crazily and then crashed. He had the first Ponzi scheme for a stock market crash. That's all you get to hear. Okay. All right. All right. Third dude. This one is creating the gold standard. You've all heard of this, but nobody has any clue exactly how this got started. So the problem is, in the late 1600s, we're going back to gold clipping. It's exactly what was happening in Rome. So if you take a look at the pictures here, you can see, I need to do this for the Zoom people. You can see up here, this is a quarter, it's been kind of clipped off. In the older coins, not only was it along the edges, you can see they took a divot here and a divot here. All right. So in England, this is what's been happening. And also the guild, the goldsmiths guilds, refuses to automate, even though France has automated, they know how to do it. They don't want to do it. The kings have said, you've got to. It becomes a massively huge problem because you're losing trust in your currency. And what are you going to do? So they have to say, we are recoining. It's called the Great Recoinage because in England, everything is great. At any rate, that's what it's called. And but there's probably, if we're going to take, they want to take all of the coins that are currently in circulation and remint them. But what's the value going to be? So we're back to the same thing the Lydians were fighting about, except now you're 2,000 years later, same issue. Into this problem comes an incredibly unlikely hero. However, you all know this person. Every single person in this room, every single person on Zoom knows who this hero is. You just have no clue he had anything to do with gold. So, no, late 1600s, we'll get to him. He has a lot to do too, but we'll get to him. Late 1600s in England, in London. This guy was a scientist. So anybody think of who would be a scientist late 1600s? He liked to eat apples. Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton. So Isaac Newton is a scientist. He's living in the countryside. He's kind of just, oh, you know, he's a nerd. He doesn't want to do much. At any rate, he's like 50 years old. I think that's what it is. And he decides he's got to get some socialization. So he decides to come to England or to London. He gets a job as an assistant at the Mint. Within 2 or 3 years, he's director of the Mint. He goes crazy after the clippers. He's got all sorts of things he does to get rid of clipping. And then in 1717, he publishes this, the representation on the Right Honorable Lords Commissioners of His Majesty's Revenue. And I can tell you, I've seen the actual page where he goes through the math. It's just as obtuse, all right, as the title. But what he did was he said, okay, I'm going to scientifically, mathematically determine what is the value of gold versus silver. Now, his thought was that silver was going to remain stable and gold would fluctuate. That's what he thought was going to happen. The reverse happened. All right. Gold remained stable. They had just come up with the gold guinea from the Gold Coast, which is Ghana, which is where I, lived. And lo and behold, he turns around and says, nope. This value stayed in place from 1717 up until I think it's 1936, I think it was. It was during the Depression, and FDR changed the value from a dollar standpoint of gold from like $32, which is basically what it had always been, to like 35. Big deal. You all know what the price of gold is now per ounce. It's thousands of dollars. So this was very little change, but it was Newton who did it. When he did that, that remained stable all throughout the Industrial Revolution. And it was part of the reason, from a currency and from an economic standpoint, you were able to have the changes, the automation, the growth that the Industrial Revolution gave us. All right, okay. I've been talking about Europe. What was going on in the US? Again, this is 2 hours and you're going to get it in about 5 minutes. There was a lot of things going on. There was a lot. One of the biggest things was the 49ers, California Gold Rush. Quick summary, the gold that came out of California increased the amount of gold globally by 5 times. Now, remember thinking about how you need to have everything growing? This gave people the amount of gold that they could start to do that. Now, if you traded, you were absolutely sure you could get something back. Now, if you wanted to build something, you had the gold to be able to do it, whether it was in the United States, whether it was in Europe, or whatever, because this gold went everywhere. All right. Now, we also know it had a tremendous impact on politics in the US. California became a state in 2 years. How long did it take for Maine to become a state? Just to give you a, kind of comparisons here, this is unreal. Now, but the United States was not on the gold standard. Actually, and don't go crazy here, just listen to me. This is, again, this is part of doing something for an hour. Basically, the United States became bimetal in 1792, okay, right along the same time with the Constitution and other things. That meant silver and gold were on parity. If, in a second, I'll actually show you a dollar bill, it says convertible to silver to this bearer, right on it, okay? Pre-Nixon, we're getting there, we're getting close, okay? Now, believe it or not though, there was this fight over the whole 1800s. Is it gold, is it silver? It didn't happen so much before the Civil War. After the Civil War, a whole bunch. In 1893, there's actually, the federal government says, we're getting rid of silver, we're only going to be on gold. Remember, robber barons, JP Morgan, everybody else is around here. And gold is what those big traders, industrialists really use. Silver is the currency of the Main Street merchants. But they said, we're going to get out of this. At which point, there is a depression that's almost as bad as the one we all know about in the 30s. It just didn't last as long. All right. And out of that, again, it becomes a major political issue. Are we going to use gold? Do we want to go to silver? And this dude steps in 1896. You all know him, right? William Jennings Bryan. This is where he didn't actually start. He was a Nebraska congressman for a couple of years. Then he stopped on this. And this is a can of beer from Chicago because in 1896, the Democrats held their convention in Chicago. And the person who walked out as a nominee was William Jennings Bryan. And the reason he walked out was because he gave what is now called the Cross of Gold speech. And this is, 60 seconds of it.
If they dare to come out in the open field and defend the gold standard as a good thing, we will fight them to the uttermost. Having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold stamp by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
And that's literally what I'm doing is what he did. And that's how the convention ended. The next day, he was nominated. He was definitely, I'll use this term probably incorrectly, a socialist. He would make AOC look like a nothing from a progressive standpoint. He was absolutely into this. He was for the people. He ran, he lost. He ran a second time, he lost. He ran a third time, he lost. He did become Secretary of State under Wilson. All of you know him really though from where? You don't know any of this, huh? The Scopes Monkey Trial. Yeah, you all know him from the Scopes Monkey Trial. He died 6 days after that. Okay. It's again, I get amazing with all of this stuff. So I'm going to skip over World War I again. This is something you should do. We're going to go to this. This is, yes, where is this? It's Bretton Woods. What happened in Bretton Woods? A meeting. Anybody remember what the meeting was about? Monetary conference, the Bretton Woods Monetary Conference. It changed pretty much the entire economic scope, landscape. Part of it was because of things that were done at the Treaty of Versailles, how they were doing things there. Like I said, I can't go all the way through this because I've got to get to Nixon and he's coming soon. All right. So I do have 1.5 minutes. That is the greatest summary for the Bretton Woods Conference you can think of, and it's going to lead us right to where we need to go. So here we go.
After World War II, it was clear the world needed a new financial system. The gold standard was considered too rigid, but at the same time, economists were worried that countries would devalue their currency to boost exports. For this reason, 44 countries sent delegates to a conference held in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, as of the 1st of July, 1944. The US, which held 2/3 of the world's gold reserves after the war, was obviously the most influential player, and ultimately, all currencies ended up linked to the dollar, and the dollar was linked to gold. One important concern arose, though. If a country goes through an economic crisis, how can it get out of it without devaluing its currency? To address this issue, 2 institutions were created. One, the International Monetary Fund, which was supposed to lend money to countries that are in trouble and cannot attract financing from other sources. 2, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is now called the World Bank and was supposed to help less developed countries grow. Unfortunately, as good as it may have sounded on paper, the Bretton Woods system didn't survive because the United States kept running deficits to fund various projects, and therefore, the amount of dollars in existence kept increasing while the gold reserves of the US kept shrinking.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. We're going to get to Nixon. He's the next couple of seconds, all right? So this is important. You saw the printing press a second ago, printing out money, more and more money, all right? But remember, the dollar is tied to gold at this point. This is after Bretton Woods when they're showing this. So United States, one of the reasons we're printing out more money, can you think of what was happening in the 60s? Where were we at war? Again, military, the need gold, Vietnam, right? There's Great Society going in there. There's a whole bunch of other things that are also happening. But there's another really important thing that always keeps getting lost. As we're printing more money, the value of that money gets less because we're tied to gold. So it's still $35 for an ounce of gold. All right. But it's easier to get dollars because we printed a whole bunch of them. So what is Germany? What is France? What is England? What is Spain? What are they doing? Economies still get their power, economic power, from having more gold. Think about it. What is going on? Is it a bargain to buy gold? Yeah, it's a real bargain to buy gold. And you know what's going on? Those countries are buying gold like it's going out of style because they can. It's a good deal. So you've got 2 things going on. Yes, the United States is printing a heck of a lot more money, and the US is tied to gold. And those pirates are coming in and taking all the gold away. Those bargain hunters, it's just like Jordan Marsh, for crying out loud, and 30, 40 years ago, going to the basement. So that's happening. Now, remember, here we go. Here's what happens next.
As more countries demanded gold in exchange for their dollars. As such, on the 15th of August, 1971, Nixon officially announced that dollars would no longer be convertible to gold, thereby putting the final nail in the coffin of the Bretton Woods system.
Bang. Now, I'm now going to show you one other thing. This happened on a Sunday night, 1971. If you were on the East Coast, you were all watching Bonanza and wanted to know what Hoss and Little Joe, what trouble they were going to get in. And Nixon comes on unannounced, as I understand it, and has this speech. And he's really concerned because there's really bad inflation. So what he's really pushing is wage controls, price controls, and tariffs. That's what he's pushing. I'm going to show you a minute and a half of that speech. And in that is when he talks about gold.
The third indispensable element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In the past 7 years, there's been an average of one international monetary crisis every year. Now, who gains from these crises? Not the working man, not the investor, not the real producers of wealth. The gainers are the international money speculators. Because they thrive on crises, they help to create them. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what is this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? The third indispensable element.
Basically, he then goes into, it's not really a big deal for you. You don't need to really worry about it. It's way too technical for everybody to really understand. And to a certain extent, he has a point, because I don't think anyone totally understood exactly what he did when he did that. Because remember that when he did it, he said, we're going to do it temporarily. It didn't turn out to be temporary, all right? The other thing is that the dollar had always been tied to gold. Well, since Bretton Woods had been tied to gold, but now you're separating that. So gold starts to float in what's its value, and what happens to the dollar, and how does that work? And how do you do international trade? And the dollar then becomes what gold used to be like, kind of, not totally. These are just a couple of dollar bills. Like I said, the one down at the bottom, $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. That was before 1971. So what starts to happen through all this is that he makes that change. People say, well, no, you've got to go back to the gold standard. You've heard that. If you read Forbes magazine, they've been touting go back to the gold standard for decades. All right. My dad, who was an accountant and all the rest of that, to his death at 95, we should all be on the gold standard. Didn't even know what he meant. I have a better idea now. So what has happened is that there's macroeconomic changes. So there's this thing called modern monetary theory. I can tell you that 2 years ago when I taught the gold course, I couldn't understand this. I had no idea. I read all the documentation and details, and it was like, what is this? Thankfully, in the last 2 years, I have found these unbelievably short summaries, and you need to. So I'm gonna give you a minute and a half that is a really great summary of something that's incredibly complex, but it's very important to being able to understand that first quote. So here we go. Oh, by the way, modern monetary theory uses something called fiat money. Anybody have any idea what fiat money is? Invented. Make it so. Basically, the king said it, so it is so. It's a fiat. It is literally called fiat money. Okay, it gets back to trust, what we were talking about way at the beginning. All of these things are still here. So here we go.
Just print endless money with no consequences? Well, maybe. The idea that money has to be tied back in physical goods like gold or silver is a fading ideology, and our modern system of fiat currency ties the value of money to consumer confidence in the government that backs it. Modern monetary theory states that countries that are monetarily independent, like the US, UK, Canada, and Japan, are not constrained by the amount of money they can bring in from taxes or revenues in determining their budgets. In other words, countries that don't rely heavily on other currencies don't have to worry about balancing their budgets. If the US brings in $10 in taxes, they could theoretically spend $12, $15, $20 without issue. But this is oversimplified. Why would economists think that this could work? After all, isn't a balanced budget good and debt bad? In microeconomic situations like a household, this is certainly true, but macroeconomics for countries works differently. Under the guidelines of MMT, governments wouldn't need to rely on taxes or borrowing money from bond sales, selling their debt to consumers, because they issue the money in the first place, and no one else can print the money other than that country. This is a really challenging idea, especially when contrasted with the typical idea that debts are bad and a balanced budget is the only way to succeed financially. In many senses, the ideas of MMT flip on their head traditional economic beliefs about how a government interacts and controls its own economy.
All right, hold still. I got one more. This is probably the longer. This is like 3 minutes. It's part of a TED Talk. It's by somebody, August of 2021, Stephanie Kelton. She is one of the economists who helped, I'll say, invent or create MMT. And I've edited that 20-minute TED Talk down to 3 minutes where I think there's some critical things. So we're just gonna listen to that and then we'll come back.
When things break, we have an opportunity. We can pick up the pieces and put them back together the old way, or we can look for better ways to build. COVID broke everything. Here in the US and around the world, governments did some extraordinary things. They sent money to people directly to help them buy food and pay rent. They did all of this and more without raising taxes or having a prolonged battle over the usual question of how to pay for it. But as someone who's been trying to change the way we think about deficits and government spending, I saw this as an opportunity to show why government budgets don't work like household budgets, why all of their red ink is really our black ink, and why our nation can afford to keep investing in the things we need, even after spending trillions to fight the pandemic. For a while, it looked like the US and other countries were starting to break the mold on the old way of thinking about deficits and taxes. But now, here we are, just a handful of months after all of that bold action, and we're sliding back into our old habits of thought. Can we build affordable housing and fix crumbling infrastructure? Can we expand Medicare to include dental, vision, and hearing? Can we tackle our climate crisis? As Congress debates these questions, everyone is back to asking, how will you pay for it? It's the wrong question. In fact, the right questions don't involve money at all. Instead of worrying about where the financing will come from, we should be asking, are these things worth doing? And do we have the real resources, the people, the equipment, the raw materials, and the technology to do them? Will they make society better off? And do we have the political will to act? I'm one of a handful of economists who contributed to the body of academic scholarship known as MMT, or Modern Monetary Theory. MMT provides an accurate description of how a fiat currency, like the US dollar or the British pound, actually works. It reminds us that we're no longer on a gold standard, so finding the money to pay for the things we need is never an issue for countries like the US or the UK.
All right. She goes a little bit further and talks about inflation. She says we do have to be worried about inflation. However, the inflation she's talking about is not because you've got more currency, it's the inflation we see with supply and demand issues, which is obviously, we've got that in spades all around the world right now. All right. So you've got microeconomics, macroeconomics. I'm not an economist. I just kind of fell into a lot of this stuff because I got interested in gold. So now we're going back to Kevin. All right. Now, instead of the 30-second version, I'm going to give you the 90-second. Remember, this is 90 seconds from the first 12 minutes of the hour and a half that was really an 8.5-hour presentation. So I just want to make sure we know where I'm coming from.
The CBO score says in 5 years it's going to cost $800 billion. In 10, more than 357. That's what your children's children will have to pay. And they'll mark this day that it happened. We know it means more crushing debt for the 330 million Americans and generations.
Can you start it over? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to.
The Democrats are showing once again. I don't think the generations will laugh at the spending of what you do tonight. The CBO score says in 5 years it's going to cost $800 billion. In 10, more than 357. That's what your children's children will have to pay. And they'll mark this day that it happened. We know it means more crushing debt for the 330 million Americans and generations to come. The Democrats are showing once again. I don't think the generations will laugh at the spending of what you do tonight. I don't think they'll laugh about the continuing inflation you will create. I don't think they'll laugh. And yet at this very moment, the Democrats are preparing to go on yet another unnecessary spending binge. Then in a couple weeks, they'll have the audacity to ask Congress to raise the debt limit, to borrow more on the overspending. I look forward to that debate as well. My colleagues on the other side often say that what Washington borrows and spends doesn't matter, that the lessons of history don't apply here. They also said the bill wouldn't cost money. The American people understand what this out-of-control spending will do, because they felt it from your very first bill you passed. You created inflation.
All right, couple of things here. You need to think about 2008, 2011, the Great Recession. How much money did the government spend to bail out the banks? It was trillions, right? All right. Trillions and trillions of dollars to bail out the banks. That money had to be printed up. Did we have inflation? No. Okay, so now let's go back to COVID. Stephanie Kelton. COVID was around for 2 years. It was the first 6 months when trillions of dollars were printed up and given to all of us to bail us out. Did we have inflation then? No. All right. Now, I can tell you this is not a simple thing. How are the Democrats and the Trumpers or Republicans, whatever you want to call them, positioning the Inflation Reduction Act or the Build Back Better Act? Who's in the past? Who's in the future? The most important question, who's really correct? I don't have the answer. I'm not here to give you the answer. Okay? I am not here to give you the answer. I'm just here to try and give you perspective. Because I can tell you, all through September, October, and November, I over and over and over again heard all the political ads that kept screaming, Damn it all, inflation, it's all because we're printing too much money. And historically, that's true. Is it still true? Or is Stephanie Kilton really right? You know, I don't know. You know, I think you're gonna get, like I said, I don't have the answer. But hopefully you get a little, if I've done anything and helped you have a different perspective on what Kevin McCarthy or anybody else is saying, that's great. And I know this is an incredible debate. I mean, it's down to even the late night comedy people. John Oliver did a spectacular 30 minutes on inflation, looking at both sides, and did just a great job of it. Jon Stewart with his podcast, he's done one with an academic, a professor from, I think it was Princeton, who absolutely, you will be convinced inflation is because we printed too much money. He's also got another hour with a whole other two other, professors that were like Stephanie Kelton and say, no, it's not that at all. Questions? Throw rocks, whatever, I don't know. Thoughts, please.
What happened with silver? The reason I said longevity is my recollection is that silver became less.
Silver actually, what happened in the United States is that we officially went onto the gold standard in 1900, finally. All right. By the way, the Bank of England was 1696, and I think it was 1916 when the Fed Reserve was finally came into existence. Just to give you a difference, I mean, the United States does not want to have anything centralized. All right. So England's got the Bank of England's got the Bank of England. Took us almost 300 years to 200 and some odd years to get the Fed. It's just different ways of doing things, guys. Yes. Anything else? Go ahead. Thank goodness. Ask a question.
If you any one thing, you can print the money, print the paper money. There is okay. That's just like anything else. A little bit is okay. But I can't name them, but there's so many other things involved. Trust being one of them. Trust in the country, obviously, we're talking about this country. But is the trust there? I'm not saying it is or isn't, I don't know, but that's just one other thing. There's other things involved.
Yep, absolutely does. And there's no question from a historical standpoint. I showed you, I can go all the way back, for crying out loud, to Rome. They went and devalued their coins, so they had too many. It was inflation, and it was one of the financial reasons why Rome fell. Not the only by a long shot, but it was, as you said, there's a lot of things that go into making an event happen.
The dollar is overvalued because it's the only alternative at the moment. You take a look at England, and England showed you a plan that said, we're just going to spend money and we have no idea how we're going to pay it back. And they batted them down, and that woman left the prime ministership in 6 weeks or something. Right. This is, all of these MMT people told us we would have no inflation. This is just a supply imbalance. They're absolutely wrong.
He has absolutely the strong side in this discussion. Absolutely. That's what everyone says, and that's why they, I mean, MMT, I gave you 2 examples. I don't know that there's any other. And I just showed you historically a whole boatload of examples where, it's different. But you just, I understand exactly what you're saying. The only other thing at the very beginning, you said the dollar is the currency at the moment, right? I think you said that.
It's the world standard.
It's the world standard.
There is no alternative.
There is no alternative. there are places that would love to have an alternative to the dollar.
Absolutely.
And we need to be, and I don't think any of us have a clue about what that would really mean if something else came in as an alternative.
Well, cryptocurrency was a thought, but you know, their fiat is now tainted by all sorts of people who committed fraud. So this guy took money and he basically invested real money and gave people IOUs. It was like the catch-22 where the guy says, "Oh, you own a stock."
Yeah,
And,
right.
and here's your stock. And
Yeah.
he one stock and wrote it out. It was a farce. And it's gonna taint cryptocurrency
Absolutely has and will.
and has done it.
Yes, yes, absolutely has.
And cryptocurrency has a lot of good things for it. And a lot of market efficiencies built in.
Blockchains and other things. The technology is amazing. Yeah.
Right, the technology is great,
Yep.
but you've tainted it because there was no, it's the greater fool theory. And that's what happened.
And if I had spent time on John Law, you would have seen crypto. I mean, when I go through John Law, it's crypto in spades. Yes. By the way, I didn't say he was a gambler and he was a mathematical genius. That was the other part of John Law. Like I do. I spend about,
Legal jurisprudence owes a lot to John Law.
other than his name, I mean, yes, yes, yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. Yeah.
What happens to countries whose economies are tied to the US dollar? You know, that they use the US dollar as their currency.
They don't have a fiat currency then, and they cannot do what modern monetary theory talks about.
But when,
So, for
as we
example,
print
Ghana,
Our money, does the value of their money go down?
yes,
Well, yeah.
yeah, I mean, if the value of the dollar goes up or down, so will theirs if it's directly tied.
Yeah.
So many countries are indirectly tied to the dollar though. And Ghana was indirectly tied to the dollar, so it still gets impacted. So one of the things in here, they talk about Britain and the US. Other things that are other explanations will add Canada, Japan, Britain, the US, and I'm forgetting, there's 5 of them. There was one other, may have been France. I can't remember for sure. But yes, that's where it is.
The goal is
This is on the euro.
That's right. That's right. So they're euro, so it wouldn't be that way.
De Gaulle used to say, hated the United States because Kennedy would just print lots of money and he could do nothing about it.
Correct. I mean, you saw, even in the little clip, the money prints are going out here. Other questions, other comments? Yes, there's some.
There's a question from the Zoom audience from Viola Sheehan. Do we still need the gold in Fort Knox?
I would say, first off, there is not nearly as much gold in Fort Knox as there used to be. That's number one. Okay. Number two, since we are no longer tied to the gold standard, no, we probably don't. Now, having said that, if you go to the World Gold Council website, they will tell you which countries are mining gold. And number one right now is China, and has been that way for about 5-6 years. Used to be South Africa, believe it or not. So people are still getting a lot of gold. They're mining gold. It's being used in very different ways. Again, that first clip that I showed you from the World Gold Council, if you want to, they have 6 clips, each of them 10 to 12 minutes. And they're very, very well done. They're promoting gold, not the way I talked about it. They're promoting gold. So the new telescope, no, not Hubble, the newer one. Cook, is it? Pardon? Webb. Okay, Webb. Go look at the Webb telescope again, a picture with all of the wings out. And you're going to be looking at, God, how big is the thing? 100 feet by 100 feet. It's all lined in gold. Absolutely. Gold is used all over the place in space. And in the World Gold Council, the videos, somebody is making this incredibly souped up, expensive car, and he's got gold on the engines, and he said he needed it from a technology standpoint. And I went, okay, I don't know if I believe it, but he's doing it. But where they do need it, computers. It's because of its conductivity, they use it in supercomputers in a lot of places. So gold is being mined, and it's being used in ways that we hadn't thought, as well as it's just being used to countries and people want to have it. So yeah, we're probably okay without having Fort Knox. Certainly didn't need to have as much as we have. Another question there?
Need to have balance in this slide. They're all liberals.
Oh, that's true. But remember, I just before that, yeah, I know. But before that, wait a minute. That was 90 seconds before that slide. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
A comment and a question, and the comment just heard is kind of interesting. A friend of mine was an economist is an economist with the Federal Reserve, although I think he's retired. And he once took me to the gold vaults at the New York Fed.
Yes.
And you go
down on Wall Street.
Right.
Yes.
You go downstairs and go through an elaborate security system. And in there, they have wire cages by country. So in other words, they're keeping the gold for other countries that do not necessarily have sufficient security, or they're concerned that somebody's going to, some president's going to run off with it or whatever. So that you're telling them maybe. Yeah. So they have all these, and the wire cages are no more than like 2x4s with some chicken wire. It's really a bizarre system, but the security system to get in is much more elaborate. But the question I have, it goes back to your history with Lydia and Croesus and such. I read that in the history of Islam, that they essentially invented checks because people who were on the Hajj to Mecca needed a way to carry value with them. And I'm wondering if you have ever read that or heard that.
I have not heard that, but what I do in the class is I talk about one of the, before Elon Musk or whatever, one of the richest men in history. His name is Mansa Musa. He was a king out of Timbuktu. Timbuktu is in Mali, very close to the Gold Coast. He was incredibly rich. And when the Portuguese and other people were actually trying to discover more things in Africa, they were looking for Timbuktu because it was a city of gold. In 1275, he, who is a Muslim, made the Hajj. And with him, he brought supposedly 60 camels laden with gold. And he gave the gold away as he went along. In Alexandria, he dumped off so much gold, they had inflation for 10 years, supposedly. Again, more, it's the same concept historically. And he did do the Hajj and then came back. Because I've heard that, I teach that story, I know it's true. Maybe they did come up with something like a check instead of, because he had a pretty big impact, Alexandria, and then all the way to the Hajj with the gold that this guy got or brought. But I haven't heard that other story.
I'm sure they were paper with the Bank of Camden here.
Yeah, right.
There's some representation of wealth that they didn't have to carry it.
They may have.
India.
They may have.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know that story about Mansa Musa. It would fit that they might have done something, but I don't know for sure. Okay. Anything else? Thank you all very, very much. You've all taken time out of a Sunday before Christmas, which is amazing. I enjoyed having you. I thank you. It's with COVID, I do way too many of these things just online streaming. I love doing it in front of people, if you didn't figure that out. So it was great having you. Okay. Thank you. I'll be around if you want to just chat more, debate more, discuss more, whatever. Thank you to everybody online too.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Camden Conference. That was a wonderful afternoon. Learned a lot. And remember, you can go to camdenconference.org to learn more about Camden Conference and the upcoming conference event in February. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend and happy holidays. And we'll see you back here for another virtual or hybrid program or live program soon.